Hi, Erica here, and I'm going to make for you one of my favorite raw dishes. This is raw pizza. It is nutritious, it's full of raw enzymes, and it is delicious and easy to make once you get the hang of it. Now, if you notice, it's a darker, kind of richer red color around the perimeter, particularly in that upper left-hand corner. That is because it is dry the way I wanted it to be in those spots, but it's not in the center. It didn't dry in the center because the dehydrator broke when I was in the home stretch of making my pizza. I ate it anyway. You will need a food processor. You will also need a grinding apparatus of some sort. I'm using a coffee grinder that I've repurposed as a nut grinder and clearly have had it for a very long time. Now, you can either use old-fashioned rolled oats. These are gluten-free from Bob's Red Mill, obviously. Or if you want to keep your recipe raw, use unsweetened coconut chips. Now, I don't know for a fact that those are raw, but I think if they had been heated to a high degree, they would be brown instead of being white. I'm not sure though. You'll need some spices, whatever you would use for a marinara. I have some herbs and some garlic salt. You will also need some greens. Now, I recommend you use the pulp from your morning juice, but I didn't have any this morning, so I didn't have any pulp to use. So I'm going to use spinach. For the sauce, you'll need a tomato. That was an onion. Some tomatoes. Aren't those cute? Oh, just want to eat you up. Some parsley, some garlic, and again the sun-dried tomatoes and the green olives. Just to recap, the star of the show, as far as the crust goes, is the soaked sunflower seeds. They have a really mild taste and they blend up and just they make a perfect crust. They really do. So I would recommend using this particular nut over other ones for pizza crust or any bread that you want to be kind of wheat tasting. So I'm going to take those dry coconut chips and grind them into a coarse coconut flour. The nut grinder doesn't really make anything smooth, but it doesn't need to be smooth, and you'll see why coming up. That's about a quarter of a cup. So I'm just going to take that out and then fill it back up again so that I have a half a cup of coconut flour. And again, you can use arrowroot powder. You could use the oatmeal ground up. You could use almond flour. You just need about a half a cup of a dry ingredient. Okay, now for the wet ingredients that go into the crust. I'm going to add a whole cup of the soaked room temperature sunflower seeds. I soaked them in the refrigerator, but I brought the whole container out and let it come up to room temperature before I started making the recipe so that it would cut down on the drying time. Everything right now is about cutting down on the drying time. I can get this pizza in and out of the dehydrator in 2 hours. And that really is credited to not using a lot of water. So all this futzing you see with the sunflower seeds and moving them down, if I added liquid, it would blend more smoothly, but I don't want to add any liquid, at least not until I have to. So this doesn't really need to be very smooth, and it doesn't need to be totally free of whole sunflower seeds. Like I like mine a little organic and a little chunky. You really won't, that won't be the mouthfeel when the crust is done. So now I'm going to add in the greenery. That was just parsley and spinach. Okay, so this part's a little weird because typically you would put the soft ingredient on the bottom. So what I should have done is taken everything out and put the greens in on the bottom and then put the sunflower seed mixture back on the top, but I didn't. So now I have to add a little bit of room temperature water in order to get it to incorporate. So I didn't want to add any liquid, but that wasn't too much. Alright, so now I'm just going to give that another blend. It's starting to turn green, which means that my spinach is incorporating, and I don't want to over blend it. I just want to get it incorporated in there well, but I don't want my spinach greens all to be pulverized into a liquid. So I'm going to take that out and combine it with the dry ingredient, which was the coconut flour, and then mix it all together. The key for this is keeping everything really dry. Now I'm going to spice it. Just some Italian seasonings, garlic powder, and onion powder. Give that a little mix. And that is it as far as the crust goes. Make sure you give that a little taste before you put it in the dehydrator. If you don't think it tastes good now, it won't taste good later. And the nice thing about using sunflower seeds for this is they're kind of bland once you've soaked them and blend them up. They don't really contribute a lot to the flavor. So what you mix in with it is really what you taste. So with me, I tasted Italian seasonings and a little spinach, and it was a little sweet from the coconut, even though they're unsweetened. Coconut has its own sugar, so it was pretty convincing as a pizza crust. So that's it up close. You can kind of see the chunkies still left in there. Now the final step is to pinch the edges, and there are two reasons for doing this. One is to keep your sauce from rolling off. It'll kind of make a little barrier if you get carried away at the end. And two is to keep it from over drying on the edges. If you pinch them or thicken the edges, it'll dry more uniformly because the edges tend to dry first, and when that happens, they get crunchy and they break when you take it out. So onto the sauce. Isn't that the biggest bell pepper like ever? It had a little bad patch that I took off, but it's like huge. It's like 2 handfuls. Okay. Parsley, spices, same ones I used before. Tomatoes, onion, garlic, and then the sun-dried tomatoes and green olives again. The sun-dried tomatoes are the hardest ingredients, so they go into the food processor first. And I'm just going to add one of my tomatoes that I've cut in half and kind of squeezed out some of the water and the seeds. And then I'm going to give that a whirl just until I've broken down all the sun-dried tomatoes into a nice little paste. So I squeezed the tomatoes in order to get some of the liquid out, but I kind of overdid it a little bit because I needed to add some water to keep the sauce moving later on. If you leave a little bit of the water, not all of it, from the tomatoes, then you won't have to add any water later. So I added more, and I didn't put all the tomatoes in at the same time. See, that's about right. I didn't put all the tomatoes in at the same time because I wanted them to be a little chunky. The first couple of tomatoes were just my sacrificial tomatoes because I needed the liquid from them. Now the greens go in, and it's just parsley. You can put whatever ones you like. I'm going to throw in a couple of those green olives as well, and some oil. And I forgot to list that among the ingredients at the beginning, but I need a little fat in my sauce. My mother always made meat sauces, so marinaras without fat in them is not right. So there's the water that I needed to keep the mixture moving because it thickened a little bit when it started to emulsify from adding the oil, and I needed more liquid. So now I'm just going to microplane some garlic in. And the microplane, if you haven't seen one before, is basically just like a little tiny grater, and it makes a paste out of whatever you're grinding. So you can see that's 2 cloves of garlic in very fine paste-like. Bell peppers and onions, just a handful of each of those. Again, this is going to go by taste. If you want yours to be really dense on the veggies, then go ahead and load it up. Now normally I would take this out of the container and add the spices in and then just stir it instead of processing it again, but it's a little chunky, so I'm going to add in my seasonings and then I'm going to give it another little whirl. That looks about right to me. Yeah, that's about right. A little chunky. That looks good. Okay, so I'm going to take that, and normally I wouldn't add lemon if I was just using it as a pizza sauce, but it'll taste a little better. It'll marinate, and the flavors will come together more if you introduce some acid. Now I'm going to add a little more salt because I tasted it and it needed a little bit more salt. So I'm going to sprinkle a little more in. But I'm also going to put in some lemon juice. And again, you can put it in or you can leave it out if you choose. But I like it because the sauce that's remaining and that'll go in the refrigerator will have a better flavor. It'll marry together better if it has an acid in the mix. So I don't need it for the pizza sauce, but I will need it for the marinara later. So I'm just going to add it now. And that's pretty much it as far as the sauce goes. Took out the blade. I'm just going to mix it up, put the lid on it, and stick it in the refrigerator until the pizza crust dehydrates. Alright, so the pizza crust is done, and these are the ingredients, sans the lemon. That was just the other half that anyway. I'm gonna put my sauce on top, and I'm kind of squeezing it against the side to make sure there's no excess water in the sauce. So you can see the edges are nice and uniform, they didn't over dry. It's firm, but not hard. So I'm just going to put my sauce on, and I'm going to reserve the rest of that for tomorrow to use it as a marinara for some pasta. And then I'm just going to add the ingredients over the top. More bell pepper. Sliced tomatoes would be good. They kind of look like pepperoni. I like green onions, and really this is all I wanted on my pizza. You could also put onions on it, so you can load it up and kind of do the works. You can put the sun-dried tomatoes back on it again. You can find some totally other veggies to use, but I wouldn't recommend like making an Asian pizza after you have spiced or seasoned both the sauce and the crust with Italian seasonings. I would keep kind of that same vein. That is garlic flowers. It's fermented, and I don't even know if you can really see, it's organic garlic flowers, and it's just used as a seasoning. It's raw and again fermented. I just wanted to add something a little more garlicky to the top without adding garlic, and the garlic flowers taste like garlic but not. Really, I'm just going to drizzle some of the oil in over the top. Alright, so that's it with the sauce on it, and I'm going to put that back into the dehydrator for another half an hour. So the total amount of dehydration time would be an hour and a half. So this is it out of the dehydrator, and it's still not all the way dry. It's dry in that upper left and down at the bottom frame, but it didn't dry in the middle because it broke. So it is producing lots of air but no heat. So I'm just going to slide this off and cut it up. I think right before I ate it, I added a handful of crushed red peppers. But I'm just going to cut it up now so you can kind of see what kind of consistency that crust has after having only dehydrated for an hour and having liquid put on top of the crust, which is always a bit tricky when you're dehydrating anything. And it's a really thick crust. You don't have to make it as thick. You can make it as thick or thin as you like, but this is just my preference. Sometimes I like thin crust, sometimes I don't. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. I hope you try it, and hit the thumbs up if you like. Bye.